Okay, with piecewise functions, the first thing I want to talk about is a closed circle versus an open circle. A closed circle means that it hits that point. Okay, so that it hits that point. An open circle means that it's not included. Do you remember when we were talking about brackets versus parentheses? Yeah? Okay, so brackets are kind of like where it has a closed, and parentheses are where it's open. Okay, so included versus not included. And piecewise functions have just pieces of a function, and they have a lot of restrictions. What does the word restriction mean? It has boundaries. It can't go past a certain point, right? We're trying to write the algebraic representation for this. That means that we're going to write the equation for this. Okay, so the first little piece that I want to look at is this middle piece. Okay, you see the two red dots? Okay, so we're looking right here. If I were to write a function of this line, what would it be? Like if I was to write an equation for this line, what would it be? Well, it doesn't have a slope that's changing. It's just a flat line, right? Okay, so what is that flat line? What number does it just stay at? It's at 6, right? Okay, so we're going to have y equals 6. That's actually how we write that equation. And where does that start happening? Between what two x values? -2 and +2, right? And they're both on a closed interval. That means that they have a closed dot, right? So this is going to be y equals 6. And you're going to say from the interval -2 to +2. Why did I put the line underneath? Because it's on a closed interval. It has that closed dot. Okay? Yes, ma'am. All right, so now we're going to talk about this blue piece. So there's an open circle right here. Okay, so we know that it goes from 2 to where does it end? It keeps going, right? So we're going to say from +2 to infinity. And notice how I didn't put any lines underneath? Because that circle is not closed. So we've got an open circle. Okay, so we're saying this is going to be our interval. Okay, so let's write the equation for this line. I know that's one thing that we struggled with in Algebra 1. If I write the equation for this line, how do I go about doing that? How do I go about writing the equation for this line? Well, we know that it's linear. Okay, so what's the slope of this line? Let's look at it. So if I go up 1 and I go over 1, do I touch a dot? Or I touch the line, right? Okay, so we've got a slope of 1. And where would it touch the y-axis? Where would it touch the y-axis? If I extend this line, it's going to touch at 2, right? Okay, so the equation for this line is going to be y equals 1x plus 2. And I know it's been a minute since y'all have written equations of linear functions, but this is coming from that y equals mx plus b, where b is your y-intercept and m is your slope. Another way you could have done this is point slope form, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Everybody okay so far? We got intervals and we got equations of lines. All right, so let's take a look at this one over here. So we've got this line over here. Okay, so where is that interval happening? So what's your farthest right x value? Okay, and what's your farthest left x value for that one? Negative infinity. So we're going to say from negative infinity to 2. Now, do we put a line underneath or do we not put a line underneath? It does touch, so we're going to put a line. Okay? We're going to put a line underneath the 2 part. We're not going to put a line underneath infinity. You see? Okay, so now we're going to write an equation for this line. Okay, so let's check the slope. So if we have this point right here, and we're trying to get to this point right here, how many units did we go over, and how many units did we go down? We went up 2 and over 1. So we've got a slope of 2x, right? Now we've got to figure out what the y-intercept is. So if we go up 2 and over 1, we're going to be right here. If we go up 2 and over 1, we're going to be right here. So what's that y-intercept going to be? 10. So this is going to be 2x plus 10. So this right here is an absolute value, like brackets, if you will. Which, what that means is, whatever we plug in here, so like let's say we plug in -5 into this x. We're going to say -5 plus 2. Well, we know that that's -3, right? Well, we're going to take the absolute value of that. So that means that we're going to make it positive. So that'll be 3. And then we'll add 3 plus 3. Does that make sense? Okay, so if we're going to graph this piecewise function, we're going to have to look at our intervals. So what does this interval say? Okay, so this is saying anything less than -3 is what we're going to plug in here. So what's less than -3? Or equal to? So let's talk about what's less than -3. Pick a number. -4. All right, so we're going to take -4 and we're going to plug it in here. Okay, so we're taking this first equation. If we plug in -4 into my absolute value, what's -4 plus 2? -2. And then let's take the absolute value. So that's going to give me +2. What's 2 plus 3? Okay, so we're going to plot a point at -4, 5. All right, let's pick another point or another x value from this interval. -8. Okay, so let's take -8. Let's plug it in. Yep. So that's going to give me -6. What's the absolute value of -6? And then add 3 to it. So we're going to plot a point at -8, 9, right? Okay. So -8, 9. All right, let's pick another point. Let's do -6. -6 plus 2 is -4. What's the absolute value of -4? 4. What's 4 plus 3? And let's make sure that we also include -3. So if we plug -3 in here, what's -3 plus 2? -1. What's the absolute value of -1? And 1 plus 3 gives me 4. Okay, so now I'm going to connect all of these dots. If I can draw a straight line on here. Yes. Do you see this? Who does this? Perfect. Yeah, right? Okay. So that was just the first piece. So now what we're going to look at is this equation. Well, where does this equation happen? Like, what interval does it happen over? -3 to 1, right? So I'm going to take numbers from -3 to 1 and plug it into this equation right here, and that's going to give us our points, right? Okay, so give me the first number that occurs on this interval from left to right. Well, we want to include that -3, right? Why? So just because there isn't a line under here doesn't mean we don't plug it in. But we're just going to put an open circle in just 1 second. So we're going to take -3. and we're going to plug it into this equation. So if I do negative 3 squared minus 3, that's going to give me 9 minus 3, which is 6. So at negative 3, 6, I'm going to put an open circle there. At negative 3, 6, I'm going to put an open circle. And the reason why is because if I'm looking at my little greater than, less than values or symbols, this one doesn't have a line underneath. So now I'm going to plug in numbers in between negative 3 and 1. So give me another number that's in between negative 3 and 1. 0. Okay, so let's plug 0 in. Well, 0 squared is still 0. And 0 minus 3 is negative 3. So we're going to come down here. We're going to plot that point. What about another number in between negative 3 and 1? 1. Let's plug 1 in. What's 1 squared? 1 minus 3 is? So we're going to plot a point right there. Now that should be a closed circle. Why? Because look at my interval again. You see that line that's underneath? That means that I'm going to have a closed circle. What's the only number that we're missing in this interval right now? Or the other two? Negative 2. Let's plug negative 2 in. What's negative 2 squared? 4. 4 minus 3 is? Okay, so we're going to have a point at negative 2 comma 1. Okay, so now we're going to connect those points. So it's going to look like this. Okay, and when you plot this, you want to make sure that you have this open circle on the left-hand side and that closed circle on the right-hand side. And we got that from our interval right here. Okay? Our last little section is this equation. Okay? So this happens on the interval of 1 to 4. Okay? So at 1, if I plug 1 into this equation, what do I get? What's the only number that's right here? Negative 2. So at x equals 1, I'm going to plot a point at 1 comma negative 2. And that's going to be an open circle. When x is 2, what's my y value? What's my y value when x is 2? Well, I can't plug anything in here, so what would be my y value? Negative 2. I'm sorry. I should have made that negative. Why y'all not correcting me? Alright, so at x equals 2, we're going to have negative 2, right? At x equals 3, we're going to have negative 2. At x equals 4, we're going to have negative 2. And now we're going to connect all of those points.